The parking lot shimmered under the unforgiving summer sun. A barefoot girl stood in the heat, pink dress torn, clutching a filthy teddy bear. Her skin was flushed, her lips cracked, each breath more shallow than the last. From across the lot, a weathered veteran stopped in his tracks, his German shepherd frozen beside him, ears forward. The girl's glassy eyes lifted toward them. Her voice was faint, trembling. "Please, don't make me go back." And in that moment, he knew walking away was never an option. As you listen, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Make sure to subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Now, let's begin. The midday sun pressed down like an unrelenting hand, baking the supermarket parking lot until the asphalt rippled with heat. The air smelled faintly of hot rubber and gasoline, thick enough to cling to the back of the throat. Jack Turner stepped through the sliding glass doors with the heavy gait of a man who had carried too many burdens for too long. At 46, he was still broad-shouldered, but his movements bore the stiffness of old injuries. His face was hard-lined, jaw square, skin weathered into a permanent tan by years of sun, sand, and sweat. Short-cropped brown hair was peppered with gray, and a shadow of stubble clung to his chin and upper lip. Those who didn't know him might think his gray-blue eyes were cold, but they were eyes trained to watch, to measure, to notice what others missed. The faded navy work shirt he wore bore the black smears of engine grease, sticking uncomfortably to his back. The day had been long at the garage, the kind where sweat soaked through before noon, and the grocery bag in his hand carried only the basics: bread, eggs, and a cheap pack of ground beef. Beside him padded Buddy, his 5-year-old German shepherd, black and tan fur gleaming even in the haze. Buddy was lean and strong, his stance balanced with the precision of an animal trained for war. The faint scar tracing down his left flank was a reminder of a day neither of them could forget, a roadside blast that ended their military service and bound them together even more tightly than before. Jack had planned to get in and out quickly. The heat was merciless, the kind that drained patience as quickly as it drained strength. But as they stepped into the blinding brightness of the lot, Buddy's pace faltered. His ears shot forward, tail stiffening, and a deep, low growl rolled in his throat. Jack felt his chest tighten. That sound from Buddy was never casual. He followed the dog's gaze, scanning the rows of faded vehicles until he saw it, a shadow tucked between 2 delivery trucks at the far edge of the lot. They moved closer, boots sticking to the softened pavement, the heat radiating upward in waves. The closer Jack got, the clearer the shape became. Small, fragile, human. The figure sat on the ground in the narrow strip of shade cast by a rusted delivery van, knees drawn up tightly. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. A once pink dress clung to her thin frame, stained with dust and streaked with something darker. Her bare feet were blackened on the soles, small toes curling against the blistering ground. Blonde hair hung in tangled ropes, plastered to her face with sweat. In her arms, she held a small, battered teddy bear, its fur matted, one eye missing, with the desperation of someone holding the last safe thing they owned. Jack slowed his steps, dropping into a crouch a few feet away, keeping his voice low and steady. "Hey," he said, as if speaking to a skittish animal. "You okay, kiddo?" Her head lifted a fraction. The motion was slow, heavy, like even that took more effort than she had left. Blue-gray eyes met his, unfocused at first, then sharpening just enough to take in the stranger in front of her. She didn't answer. Her small arms tightened around the teddy bear until her knuckles turned white and her lips moved without sound. Buddy sat down beside Jack, but his gaze never left the girl. Something in his posture softened, ears relaxed, body tilting forward slightly, as though he'd decided she wasn't a threat, only something fragile. Finally, her voice came, cracked and dry, barely more than a whisper. "Please, don't make me go back." The words cut through the heat, through the hum of distant traffic, through everything. Jack felt them like a weight in his chest. There was no drama in her tone, no tantrum, just flat, brittle desperation. It was the kind of plea he'd heard before, though not in English, not here. The way she said it, the way her arms trembled but her chin still tucked in as if bracing for a blow, it pulled something deep from his memory. He'd seen that look in villages where the air smelled of gunpowder and fear, in children who'd learned to hide their hope because hope was dangerous. The way she shook now, it was the same as the children in war zones. The cool air from the supermarket hit Jack and Emily like a wave as the sliding doors closed behind them. After the baking heat outside, the hum of the air conditioning was almost surreal, carrying with it the faint scent of detergent, coffee, and ripe fruit from the produce section. Jack glanced down at Emily, who walked just half a step behind Buddy, her fingers tangled tightly in the thick fur around his neck. Her shoulders were hunched, her chin tucked down, like she was trying to make herself smaller, even here in the safety of the store. Jack scanned the cafe area near the front, a quiet corner with plastic tables and mismatched chairs. It wasn't private, but it was better than standing in the middle of the aisle. He gestured toward a seat, setting his grocery bag down with a quiet thud. Emily hesitated, casting a quick look toward the entrance, as though expecting someone to burst in, but then followed Buddy to the table and sat. Buddy lay at her feet almost immediately, his large frame pressed close to her legs. His tail swept the floor once, slowly, before going still. Jack had seen that before. Buddy wasn't just lying down, he was anchoring her, the way he'd done with wounded soldiers when panic threatened to take over. Jack crouched in front of the refrigerated display, grabbing a bottle of water so cold it was fogged with condensation. He carried it back and set it on the table, twisting the cap open for her. "Here," he said, sliding it closer. She took it with both hands like it was something fragile, sipped once, then again, the water catching in her throat before she swallowed. After a pause, she drank more deeply, and Jack could see the tension in her jaw loosen just a little. From behind the counter, a man in his early 50s was restocking a basket of muffins. His name tag read Tom Raines. Stocky, with a close-cropped salt and pepper beard and a soft gut pressing against his apron, Tom had the look of someone who'd been in this town all his life. His hazel eyes were ringed with the tiredness of long hours, but lit with a kind of understated kindness. He gave Jack a nod, not asking questions, but his gaze lingered on Emily for a moment before he turned back to his work. Jack went to the deli case, purchased a turkey sandwich, and returned to the table. "Eat as much as you like," he said as he placed it in front of her. Emily looked at the sandwich, then at Jack, as if trying to gauge whether this was a trick. Slowly she unwrapped the paper and took a small bite. She chewed quietly, eyes darting up every few seconds toward the entrance. Jack sat opposite her, leaning back in his chair to give her space. "You live close by?" he asked gently. She shrugged, swallowing another bite before answering. "Sort of." "What about your mom? She around today?" Emily's lips pressed together, and she pulled the teddy bear closer to her chest, tucking it against her ribs as if it could shield her from the question. "She's sick," she murmured, so softly Jack had to lean forward to hear. "She stays in bed a lot." Jack nodded slowly, not pushing. "And your dad?" Her reaction was subtle but telling, the slight tightening of her shoulders, the way her eyes flickered down to the floor. "He's not my dad," she said after a pause. "He yells a lot. Gets mad." Buddy's ears twitched, picking up on the change in her voice. Jack kept his tone steady, calm, the way he had talked to someone diffusing a tripwire. "What happens when he's mad?" Emily hesitated, her fingers worried at the frayed ear of her teddy bear, twisting the fabric until it was wound tight around her knuckles. "Sometimes, if I ask for food and he's in a bad mood, he says I don't need it, or—" She stopped, glancing toward the floor, as if the tiles themselves might judge her. "Or he locks me in my room for a while." Jack's stomach tightened. The cafe was quiet except for the low murmur of customers at the coffee counter. He caught Tom looking their way again, his brow furrowed, but the man didn't interrupt. Jack leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "Is he at home now?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know. Sometimes he goes away for a few days." Jack felt a cold thread of anger weave its way into his chest. This wasn't just about a bad temper. This was neglect, control, something deeper. He studied her small frame, the way her knees pressed together under the table, her sneakers scuffed down to the fabric. She looked like she'd been going without more than meals. A woman passed by their table, pushing a cart filled with paper towels and cleaning supplies. She glanced at Emily, offered a small smile, but Emily immediately ducked her head. Jack noticed the way her body tensed at any unfamiliar approach. He decided to keep his voice steady, unthreatening. "Emily, Are you afraid to go home right now?" She didn't look up. Her hands tightened on the teddy bear, pulling it close enough that her chin rested on its head. When she finally spoke, her voice was so faint he almost missed it. "Yes." Jack's fingers flexed on the table. "Why?" She swallowed hard, and this time her eyes lifted to meet his. They were pale blue-gray, dulled by something he recognized all too well: endurance. "Because if I go back—" She hesitated, the muscles in her jaw working as if the words themselves were dangerous. "I might get in trouble." He tilted his head slightly. "What kind of trouble?" Her eyes darted toward the front windows, toward the blinding white heat beyond them. "If I go back," she whispered, "I'll be punished." Jack sat in silence for a moment after Emily's last words, his fingers tapping lightly on the table while Buddy kept his steady post at her side. He knew the weight behind that word, punished. Too many years in the service had shown him what it looked like when fear made someone smaller than they were meant to be. He glanced toward the store entrance, then reached into his pocket for his phone. The call to the supermarket's on-duty security took only a minute. The guard, a wiry man in his mid-30s named Eli Brooks, arrived at their table within moments. Eli's posture was stiff, his tan uniform shirt buttoned up to the collar despite the heat outside, and his dark hair was slicked back neatly. His brown eyes flicked from Jack to Emily with a hint of curiosity, but his voice was level. "You needed something, Mr. Turner?" Eli had always been known for keeping order without raising his voice, a habit likely formed from his years working in busier urban stores before transferring here for a quieter life. Jack explained in calm, clipped sentences, finding the girl alone outside near the delivery vans, the state she was in, the things she'd said. Eli listened, hands resting on his utility belt, his expression unreadable. When Jack finished, Eli shifted his weight and let out a slow breath. "I'll call the local PD," he said. "We'll see what they want to do." Within 10 minutes, 2 uniformed officers stepped through the sliding doors, the faint smell of summer asphalt and engine exhaust clinging to them. The first was Officer Paul Jeffries, in his early 40s, tall and lean with close-cropped blonde hair that had begun to recede at the temples. His face was sun-creased, his jaw clean-shaven, and his pale blue eyes had the squint of a man who spent too much time in bright light. He had a reputation in town for following procedure to the letter, even if it made him seem distant. The second, Officer Lila Moreno, was younger, late 20s, with olive-toned skin, dark brown hair pulled into a tight bun, and sharp, alert eyes. Her movements were quick but controlled, the kind of precision that came from someone still eager to prove themselves in the field. Jack recounted the situation again, and Emily shrank back against Buddy, her fingers twisted in the thick fur at his neck. Officer Moreno crouched slightly, trying to meet Emily's gaze. "Hi there, I'm Lila," she said softly, but Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Jeffries took Jack aside, his tone low. "Without a visible injury or a clear statement that she's in immediate danger, we can't remove her from wherever she's supposed to be. We can do a welfare check at the address, but—" He let the unfinished sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. Jack's jaw tightened. "If you send her back right now, and she's telling the truth about being locked in and denied food, what happens when you're not there?" Jeffrey's expression didn't change, but Moreno's eyes flickered briefly toward Emily before she looked back at Jack. "We'll file a report and keep an eye out," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. They left without taking Emily, the click of their radios fading into the noise of the store. Jack returned to the table, where Buddy was still stationed like a sentry, and Emily was quietly shredding a napkin into thin strips. He sat down, leaning forward so his elbows rested on the table. "Emily," he said carefully, "I can't make promises about tomorrow, but I can make sure you're safe tonight. Would you be all right coming with me and Buddy for now?" Her fingers froze mid-tear, and she looked up at Buddy before she looked at Jack. There was hesitation in her eyes, but also a flicker of relief. She nodded once, slowly. Jack gathered his groceries, Emily's teddy bear never leaving her arms. Eli, the security guard, walked them to the door, his expression unreadable. "You taking her home?" he asked. "For tonight," Jack replied. The air outside was still thick with heat, the late afternoon sun sinking lower but losing none of its sting. They crossed the lot to Jack's old Chevy pickup, its faded red paint sun-bleached to near pink. Buddy hopped into the cab first, settling into the bench seat, and Emily climbed in after him. Jack slid in behind the wheel, the vinyl seat hot against his back. The drive back to his small rented house on the edge of town took 15 minutes. The road wound past dry fields and scattered oak trees, the air outside shimmering above the asphalt. Emily stayed quiet the whole way, her gaze flicking between the passing scenery and Buddy's steady presence beside her. Jack's house was a squat, single-story place with peeling white paint and a sagging porch. The yard was patchy with grass, more dust than green, but a few potted plants sat near the steps, stubbornly alive. He parked under the shade of an old elm and opened the door for Emily. Inside, the air smelled faintly of motor oil and coffee. The living room was small but neat. Second-hand couch, worn armchair, a low coffee table with a few books stacked on one corner. Buddy trotted in and flopped onto a rug, stretching out with a sigh. Jack led Emily to the kitchen, where the light slanted in through thin curtains. "You want more water?" he asked. She shook her head, clutching her bear. "You hungry? I can make eggs, toast, something easy." Another shake of the head. Jack studied her for a moment, reading the subtle stiffness in her shoulders. "You can sit anywhere you like. Buddy will stay with you." Emily settled onto the couch, tucking her bare feet under her dress. Buddy lay beside the couch, head up, eyes watchful. Jack busied himself in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes and the low hum of the refrigerator filling the space. He knew enough not to press her for more right now. When he finally sat down across from her with a mug of coffee, she was stroking Buddy's ear absent-mindedly. He let the silence sit for a while before asking, "You sure you don't want to tell me more about home?" Her gaze flickered to him, then back to Buddy. She took a breath, the kind that seemed to cost something. "If I go back," she said quietly, "I might be punished." The evening heat clung stubbornly to the small house, even as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Inside, the rhythmic whir of an old oscillating fan stirred the heavy air, doing little to chase away the warmth. Jack sat in the worn armchair across from Emily, his forearms resting on his knees, his gaze steady, but not demanding. Buddy lay on the rug between them, his muscular frame stretched out, the dark sheen of his black and brown coat catching the dim light. At 6 years old, the German shepherd carried himself with the calm watchfulness of a soldier, one trained to read tension in a room before it broke the surface. His amber eyes flicked between Jack and Emily, attuned to every shift in their breathing. Emily sat small and quiet on the couch, her bare feet tucked under her legs, the faded pink dress she wore rumpled and streaked with dirt from the parking lot earlier. Her hair, a tangle of light blonde strands, stuck to her damp forehead, and her hands gripped a worn teddy bear with matted fur. The bear's button eye hung by a thread, but she clung to it like it might vanish if she loosened her hold. Jack could see the way her shoulders curled inward, as though she were trying to disappear into the cushions. He recognized that posture. He'd seen it in refugee camps, in bombed-out streets, in children who had learned that stillness sometimes meant safety. He spoke softly, his voice even and measured. "Emily, earlier you said you didn't want to go home. Can you tell me why?" She didn't answer right away. Her gaze stayed fixed on Buddy, one small hand reaching out to brush her fingers along his ear. The dog didn't move, only let out a slow breath, a subtle reassurance in the quiet. She began, her voice barely more than a whisper. "They put me in the room." Jack leaned forward slightly, keeping his tone calm. "What kind of room?" Her lips pressed together before she answered, as if she had to push the words out. "It's locked. No windows. Just a bed. I have to stay there until I stop crying." She drew the teddy bear closer under her chin, her voice cracking on the last word. A tightness formed in Jack's chest. He let a long breath slip out through his nose, steadying himself before he spoke again. "Emily, that's not okay. No one should do that to you." Her eyes flicked up at him, quick and uncertain, searching for any sign of disbelief. She seemed to be measuring him against every broken promise she'd ever heard. Buddy shifted slightly, crawling forward until his head rested on Emily's knee. The movement broke her stillness, and she let out a breath that almost resembled a sigh. Jack wanted to tell her then and there that he'd make sure it never happened again. But he knew better than to offer promises he couldn't keep. Not yet. Instead, he said, "Me and Buddy, we look out for each other. Always have. And right now, we're going to look out for you too. You're safe here tonight." Her small fingers tightened in Buddy's fur, and the corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. The fan's steady hum filled the silence. Jack leaned back, his gaze still fixed on the girl. He could feel the quiet pulling at him, stirring memories he usually kept buried. He thought about how small she looked, how her voice trembled when she spoke about the locked room, and the way her eyes seemed far older than they should be. And then his mind pulled him back to a night halfway around the world, the air heavy with the smell of gunpowder and heat. He and Buddy had been moving through a narrow alley, the moon hidden behind a shroud of clouds, when the dog froze. Jack remembered the way Buddy's muscles went rigid, the low growl vibrating in his chest. A split second later, gunfire tore through the silence. Buddy lunged sideways, dragging Jack with him into the shadow of a doorway. The bullet struck the wall where they'd stood only moments before. That night, Buddy had saved his life without hesitation, putting himself in harm's way, because trust ran both ways between them. Jack blinked, pulling himself back into the present. The same instinct Buddy had shown in that alley, the same sharp sense of danger. He'd seen it in the dog's reaction to Emily earlier today. And now, looking at the girl curled on his couch, he felt that same pull deep inside his chest. He didn't know exactly how he was going to do it, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was going to save her, by any means necessary. The morning sun in mid-July was already pressing down on the cracked sidewalks when Jack stepped out of his truck. He wore the same faded work shirt from yesterday, the one with a smudge of oil across the pocket, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked by old scars and sun-darkened skin. Buddy padded along beside him, his black and brown coat gleaming in the light, ears flicking toward every sound. They moved together with an ease born of years spent watching each other's backs. Jack's plan was simple. If the system wasn't ready to act, he would gather enough voices and proof to force it to. The narrow street where Emily lived looked quiet on the surface, lined with small, sun-bleached houses whose paint had long given up the fight against the heat. But the stillness here wasn't peace. It was the kind that kept people's heads down, eyes averted. He stopped first at a weathered porch where an elderly woman was watering a row of potted geraniums. Her name was Margaret Davis, a thin, bird-like woman in her late 70s with neatly pinned silver hair and skin the color of worn parchment. She looked at Jack warily until Buddy trotted up and sat politely at her feet, tail sweeping once across the porch. That earned a faint smile. "Morning," Jack said, resting his weight on one foot, voice calm but direct. "I'm asking about the little girl, Emily. Blonde hair, about 6, lives down this street." Margaret's hand paused midair with the watering can. "I've seen her," she said finally, her voice low. "Couple times, after dark. Just wandering the sidewalk barefoot. I asked her where she was headed, but she didn't answer. Looked lost." She glanced toward the far end of the street, as if expecting someone to be listening. "It's not right for a child to be out alone at that hour." Jack nodded, pulling a small notepad from his pocket. He jotted her words exactly as she'd spoken them. "Would you mind if I took your picture, just for the record, so they know who said this?" Margaret hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Jack used his old phone to take the shot, her face framed by the bright red flowers at her knees. The next stop was a convenience store on the corner, its sun-faded awning sagging in the heat. Inside, the air conditioning hummed over shelves stocked with canned goods and dusty soda bottles. Behind the counter stood Luis Ortega, a man in his early 50s with a stocky build, tan skin, and salt and pepper hair cropped short. His arms were thick from years of lifting crates, but his eyes were kind, if tired. "I've seen her, sure," Luis said after Jack explained. "Little one comes in alone sometimes, buys a cup of instant noodles or a bottle of water, pays with coins, nickels, dimes, sometimes even pennies, always counts them twice before putting them on the counter." He shook his head slowly. "Doesn't seem like anyone's looking out for her. I told her once to come by earlier in the day, but she just looked at me like I'd asked her to speak another language." Jack wrote every word, then asked if he could take Luis's photo too. The man shrugged. "If it helps her, sure." Outside, Jack leaned against the warm hood of his truck, flipping back through the notes and photos he'd taken. They painted a picture he already suspected, a child navigating the world like no one was watching. He scrolled through his phone until he found the contact for Grace Miller, the new social worker assigned to Emily's case. She'd sounded younger when they first spoke yesterday, her voice bright but carrying an edge of determination. When she answered, the sound of typing in the background stopped abruptly. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone shifting to alertness. "Do you have something for me?" Jack explained what he had learned, reading Margaret's and Luis's accounts word for word. Grace listened without interruption, though he could hear the faint scratch of a pen on paper. "That's exactly the kind of detail I need," she said when he finished. "Photos, names, times, it all helps. Too often it's just vague complaints, and that makes it harder to act. If you can send me copies, I'll add them to the file immediately." Jack sent the photos while they spoke. "Grace," he said, lowering his voice, "this girl's not safe. Every day she spends there is another day something worse could happen." "I agree," she said without hesitation. "I'm not going to let her slip through the cracks. But to move faster, I'll need to talk to her directly again, and I'll need you to be there when I do." Buddy gave a short, low whine, as if he understood the urgency in Jack's voice. Jack rubbed the dog's head, his mind already moving through what the next steps would look like. By the time he ended the call, the sun was high enough to make the asphalt shimmer. Jack climbed into the truck, Buddy hopping into the passenger seat with practiced ease. He looked once more toward the block where Emily's house sat. Its windows closed tight against the heat. He'd seen too many situations in his life where people noticed but didn't speak up, where evidence came too late. Not this time. This time, he was going to make sure every set of eyes that had seen Emily was part of the record. By the time Grace Miller arrived at Jack's small one-story rental, the late afternoon light had turned gold, streaming through the dusty blinds. Jack had set a glass of iced tea on the kitchen table for her, the condensation already pooling into a ring on the wood. Grace, in her early 30s, had a tall, willowy frame and moved with a kind of deliberate precision, like someone used to navigating rooms full of tension. Her chestnut brown hair was pulled into a loose bun, and her pale skin showed the faintest freckles across her nose. She wore a navy blouse and slate-gray slacks that were already clinging in the summer humidity. She glanced toward the living room, where Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, with Buddy lying beside her, his head resting across her knees. The dog's black and brown coat looked freshly brushed, and his amber eyes tracked Grace's every move. Emily's small hands kept fidgeting with the worn ear of her teddy bear, though her shoulders looked looser than they had in the grocery store parking lot. Grace leaned forward, her voice low. "Jack, I have to be honest. The law's first instinct is always family reunification. Unless there's immediate danger that can be proven, they'll try to send her back." She exhaled slowly, scanning his face for a reaction. "But if you can keep gathering hard evidence, dates, witness accounts, anything showing neglect or harm, we might be able to request an emergency protection order that would legally keep her out of that house until the case is reviewed." Jack's jaw tightened. He wasn't a man who startled easily, but he knew exactly how slippery the word review could be in bureaucratic language. "And in the meantime?" he asked, his voice even but weighted. "In the meantime," Grace said, "if she's with you, she's safe." Buddy let out a slow huff, as though giving his own verdict. Jack's gaze drifted toward Emily. The little girl was now leaning back against Buddy, her head barely reaching his shoulder. Her eyes were half closed, and there was something in that small surrender that hit Jack hard. It was the kind of trust you didn't give unless you'd run out of options. He nodded toward the kitchen counter, where a pot simmered quietly. "I'm making dinner. Real food, not the instant stuff she's been living on." Grace stood, giving a faint smile. "I'll leave you to it. Send me anything you find." She paused at the doorway, her eyes flicking once more toward Emily. "And thank you. Most people wouldn't get involved." When she left, the air seemed to settle. Jack ladled chicken stew into a ceramic bowl, steam curling into the air. Emily shuffled to the table without a word, Buddy settling at her feet like a sentry. She picked up the spoon slowly, as if half expecting it to be taken away. Jack kept his tone light. "You like carrots?" She gave the faintest nod, her small shoulders lifting and falling. She ate in silence, each spoonful measured, her eyes darting toward him from time to time. Jack didn't push. He'd learned long ago, in places far away, that sometimes the safest thing you could offer someone was space. After dinner, he set up the spare bedroom. The sheets were clean but faded from years of washing. He placed her teddy bear on the pillow. Emily stood in the doorway, gripping the hem of her dress. "It's yours tonight," Jack said. "Buddy'll sleep right outside." Her eyes flicked toward the dog, who wagged his tail once in affirmation. She climbed into bed slowly, pulling the blanket over herself. Jack turned off the light, leaving the door ajar. For a long while he sat in the living room, listening. The only sounds were the hum of the old ceiling fan and Buddy's breathing by the bedroom door. Somewhere past midnight, he realized what was missing. There were no sudden cries, no restless shifting. When morning came, the sunlight edged across the floorboards, and Emily was still asleep, her small face slack with the kind of rest that comes only when you feel safe. For Jack, it was the first time in weeks he'd felt the house hold any kind of peace. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and stale coffee, the air thick with the quiet murmur of voices. Jack sat on the wooden bench outside the family courtroom, his work-worn hands clasped loosely in his lap. He wore his cleanest shirt, pale blue with sleeves rolled up, and dark slacks that had seen more than a few summers. His jaw was freshly shaved, but the fine lines at the corners of his eyes looked sharper under the fluorescent lights. Beside him sat Buddy, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a black and brown coat that seemed to drink in the light. His tail lay still, but his amber eyes moved constantly, scanning the hallway, ears twitching at every sound. Emily sat between them, her legs dangling far above the floor. She wore a simple yellow dress that Grace had bought, and her blonde hair was combed into a neat braid. Her small hands clutched the same battered teddy bear, its fur even more matted now, as if it too had weathered the past weeks with her. She kept glancing at the closed courtroom doors, her lips pressed tight. Grace Miller approached, a manila folder tucked under one arm. Today she looked more formal, navy blazer over a cream blouse, dark trousers, and low heels. Her expression was calm but firm, the same composure she had carried in every meeting since they'd met. She crouched down to Emily's level. "You're going to do just fine," she said gently, "and Buddy will be right there with you." Inside the courtroom, the air felt cooler, almost sterile. The judge was a man in his late 50s named Harold Price, tall, with a square jaw, neatly combed gray hair, and a no-nonsense demeanor honed by decades of hearing every kind of family dispute. He sat high behind the bench, glasses perched low on his nose as he glanced over papers. Jack felt a prick of unease. Courtrooms had a way of reminding him of military debriefs, formal, tense, and one misstep away from disaster. Grace presented the evidence first. She called Mrs. Eleanor Bates, the elderly neighbor, to the stand. Mrs. Bates, small and thin, with white hair pinned in a bun, spoke in a clear, steady voice. She recounted seeing Emily alone outside at night, and how it had troubled her for months. Then came Michael Torres, a young man with a stocky build and a beard shadow, who worked at the convenience store down the street. He testified to Emily coming in alone to buy instant noodles with loose coins, sometimes looking pale and tired. When it was Emily's turn, Jack felt his heart rate climb. She stepped up slowly, Buddy padding at her side, his nails clicking on the polished floor. Judge Price raised an eyebrow, but allowed the dog to remain after Grace explained his role in the case. Buddy settled under the witness stand, resting his head near Emily's feet. At first, her voice was almost a whisper. "Sometimes, when I cried, he put me in the locked room," she said, her fingers twisting the teddy bear's ear. "And sometimes, I didn't get dinner if he was mad." Her gaze flicked down to Buddy, who gazed back at her, calm and steady. "Then, Buddy and Uncle Jack found me. I was hot and thirsty, and..." She swallowed hard. "I didn't want to go back." The courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the clerk's pen. Grace's questions were gentle, guiding her through what happened in the parking lot, how she'd felt, and what life with Jack had been like since. Emily spoke about clean sheets, warm food, and how Buddy slept outside her door at night. When Grace finished, the judge leaned back, his eyes moving between Jack, Emily, and Buddy. The opposing counsel, a thin, balding man in a gray suit, tried to argue that family reunification was best, but his voice lacked conviction against the mounting testimony. Judge Price finally spoke. "Given the testimony provided, the corroborating witness accounts, and the report from Child Protective Services, I am issuing a temporary custody order placing Emily under the care of Jack Thompson, pending further review and suitability assessment for permanent guardianship." Jack exhaled slowly, the weight of the words settling over him. Emily looked up at him with wide eyes, as if not quite believing what she'd heard. Buddy wagged his tail once, a soft thump against the wood floor. As they left the courtroom, the summer light poured in through the tall glass windows, warm against their faces. Jack didn't speak, just rested a hand lightly on Emily's shoulder. For now, she was safe. And he knew with every ounce of certainty in him that he'd fight to keep it that way. The late July sun spilled gold across the modest backyard, washing the patchy grass in warm light. The air still carried the weight of summer, but a faint breeze wove its way between the young maple trees Jack had planted the year before. The small wooden fence he'd built by hand stood like a quiet guard around the property, keeping the world at a respectful distance. Emily was barefoot, her toes pressing into the grass as she spun in circles, her new pink dress flaring with each turn. The teddy bear, once grimy and matted, was now soft and clean, its faded bow repaired by Grace herself. Her hair, golden and untangled, caught the sun like strands of light. The laughter that spilled from her now was nothing like the cautious, whispered words she'd spoken a month ago. It was the laughter of a child who felt safe. Buddy trotted at her side, the 6-year-old German shepherd as alert and powerful as ever. His black and brown coat gleamed after his recent bath, and his strong legs moved with an effortless rhythm. Every so often, he would slow to nudge Emily gently with his nose, as if reminding her he was still watching over her. Jack stood on the porch, leaning against the wooden post, a tall glass of iced tea sweating in his hand. He wore a simple gray t-shirt and faded jeans, the fabric worn thin at the knees. His salt and pepper hair caught the light, and his weathered face was softened by a faint smile. Watching them, he felt a stillness in his chest, a calm he hadn't known in years. Inside the house, the faint hum of the old refrigerator was accompanied by the scent of fresh bread. Grace had stopped by earlier with a basket of groceries, just as she had nearly every week since the court's decision. She had stayed for coffee, sharing stories of other children she'd seen find their way into better homes. Grace wasn't just a social worker to Jack anymore. She had become a steady presence, someone who didn't flinch at the quiet scars left by his military years. Jack's mind wandered briefly to the day the judge signed the final papers. He'd stood there in the courthouse, Emily holding his hand, Buddy sitting calmly at his heel. Judge Price had looked him in the eye before speaking. "Mr. Thompson, you've shown you can provide stability, care, and love. This court grants you permanent guardianship of Emily Carter." The words had landed like sunlight breaking through clouds. A loud bark pulled him back to the present. Emily was crouched near the flower bed, holding something in her hands. Jack stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching against the gravel path. "What have you got there, kiddo?" She looked up, grinning. "A ladybug." She opened her palms just enough for him to see the small red and black speck crawling along her fingers. "I think she likes me." Jack knelt beside her, his knees pressing into the warm earth. "I think she knows you're safe here," he said softly. Emily's smile faltered for just a moment. "We're not ever going to leave, right?" Jack met her gaze. "Not as long as I'm breathing." The promise came easy, carved from something deep inside him that had been forged in harder places than this. The afternoon drifted on. They ate lunch at the small table on the porch, simple sandwiches, slices of melon, and a pitcher of cold water. Emily's laughter mixed with the occasional clink of ice against glass. Buddy lay in the shade, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, though his eyes never fully closed. Later, as the sun dipped lower, Jack pulled out the small kite he'd bought at the corner store. They took it to the open field just beyond the fence, the grass there tall and swaying. Emily ran ahead, the kite's bright tail snapping in the wind. Jack jogged behind her, laughing when the kite dipped before catching the wind again. Buddy followed at a slower pace, ears flicking, as if judging the strange game. As dusk settled, painting the sky in streaks of rose and violet, Jack carried the folded kite back to the house, while Emily skipped beside him. Fireflies winked in the grass, and the first stars began to appear overhead. Inside, Emily curled up on the couch with Buddy, the teddy bear pressed between them. Jack sat in his worn armchair, the old ceiling fan stirring the warm air above. His gaze rested on the two of them, the little girl who had once been too afraid to speak above a whisper, and the dog who had never left his side through war, loss, and now this quiet beginning. He wasn't rich. The house was small, the bills sometimes heavy, But for the first time in years, he felt like he had a home. With Emily's laughter echoing in the rooms and Buddy's steady presence at his feet, Jack knew one thing for certain. They were a family. And no matter what came next, they wouldn't abandon each other. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with blinding light or angelic choirs. They come quietly, in the form of a loyal dog, a tired soldier, and a little girl who still had hope left in her heart. Jack didn't just save Emily. God had placed them in each other's path at the exact moment they both needed saving. In our everyday lives, we pass by strangers not knowing the battles they fight, but sometimes, we are the answer to someone's prayer. If you believe that love and kindness are still alive in this world, share this story so it can touch another heart. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be the encouragement someone needs today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more true stories of hope and redemption. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and guide your steps, because you never know when He might use you to be someone's miracle.